You ever notice how everyone smiles, but nobody's really in control? They wake up late, scroll their lives away, make promises they never keep, and somehow they still expect a different ending. Funny, isn't it? The same habits, the same excuses over and over again, and they call it life. But you're here for a reason, because deep down you feel it, that quiet discomfort, that voice whispering, you're meant for more, but you're not doing what it takes. And that's the brutal truth no one wants to face. See, the world doesn't separate people by talent or luck or even intelligence. It separates them by one thing, a habit, a simple, painful, lonely habit that most people avoid because it forces you to confront yourself. No distractions, no excuses, just you and your discipline. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So the question is, are you ready to become the person everyone envies, or stay exactly where you are? Comfortable, average, forgotten. Most people think progress comes from feeling ready, feeling inspired, or feeling confident. But feelings are unstable, unpredictable, and often misleading. One day you feel unstoppable. The next day you feel drained for no clear reason. If your actions depend on how you feel, then your life will always move in circles instead of forward. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. Your feelings are not in charge unless you let them be. Discipline is what steps in when emotions start making excuses. There will be days when your mind tells you to rest even though you haven't earned it. Days when distractions look more attractive than your goals, and moments when quitting feels justified. In those moments, your feelings will sound logical. They will convince you that skipping once doesn't matter, that starting tomorrow is fine, that you deserve a break. And if you follow that voice repeatedly, it becomes a pattern. Not because you are weak, but because you trained yourself to obey comfort instead of commitment. Discipline works differently. It doesn't ask how you feel. It doesn't negotiate. It operates on decisions made ahead of time. When you decide that something must be done, discipline carries you through whether you are tired, bored, or unmotivated. It creates a structure where your actions are based on purpose, not mood. Over time, this builds a version of you that acts regardless of internal resistance. The uncomfortable part is that discipline often feels unnatural in the beginning. Your brain is wired to avoid effort and seek comfort. So when you choose discipline, you are going against that instinct. That's why it feels hard. That's why it feels lonely. But that resistance is not a sign to stop. It's a sign that you are breaking away from the habits that kept you average. Every time you act despite not feeling like it, you weaken the control your emotions have over you. You start proving to yourself that you are not controlled by temporary states. You begin to separate identity from impulse. Instead of saying, I don't feel like it, your mindset shifts to, it doesn't matter how I feel, it gets done. That shift is powerful because it removes excuses before they even form. There is also a deeper layer to this. When you rely on feelings, you become reactive. Your environment, your mood, even small inconveniences can change your direction. But discipline makes you stable. It creates consistency, and consistency is what builds results over time. Small actions done daily, even when you don't feel like it, accumulate into something strong. While others wait for the perfect moment, you keep moving, and that difference becomes visible sooner than you think. You won't always feel proud in the moment. Sometimes it will feel boring, repetitive, even frustrating. But discipline is not designed to feel good instantly. It is designed to create outcomes that feelings alone can never produce. It is the bridge between who you are right now and who you claim you want to become. When you start prioritizing discipline over feelings, something changes internally. You begin to trust yourself more, not because things get easier, but because you know you will follow through no matter what. That self-trust builds confidence, not the loud kind, but a quiet certainty that you can rely on your own actions. And once that happens, your emotions lose their power to control your direction. They still exist, but they no longer decide your future. Motivation feels powerful, almost addictive. It gives you a sudden rush of energy, a sense that you can change everything overnight. You watch something inspiring, hear the right words, and for a moment, you believe you're unstoppable. But that feeling fades faster than you expect. What once felt like certainty turns into hesitation, and the plans you made with confidence start to feel heavy. This is where most people fall apart, not because they lack desire, but because they depend on something that was never meant to last. Motivation is emotional. It rises when things are exciting and disappears when things become repetitive. It shows up when results are visible and disappears when progress is slow. If you rely on it, your effort becomes inconsistent. Some days you push hard, other days you do nothing. Over time, that inconsistency cancels out your progress. You stay stuck, not because you're incapable, but because your actions are controlled by something unstable. Consistency works in the opposite way. It doesn't rely on emotion or excitement. It is built on repetition, structure, and commitment. It means showing up on days when you feel strong and especially on days when you don't. It removes the question of, should I do this today? Because the answer is already decided. There is no debate, no negotiation. You simply do what needs to be done. At first, consistency feels boring. There is no rush, no dramatic feeling of transformation. It's quiet and almost invisible. You repeat the same actions again and again, and it may seem like nothing is changing. This is where most people quit, because they are chasing a feeling instead of trusting a process. But beneath that repetition, something important is happening. You are building momentum. Momentum doesn't come from intensity, it comes from continuity. Small actions repeated daily begin to stack on top of each other. What felt difficult starts to feel normal. What felt impossible starts to feel manageable. This is how real progress is created, not through sudden bursts of effort, but through steady, disciplined action over time. There is also a psychological shift that happens when you focus on consistency. You stop identifying as someone who trees and start becoming someone who does. Your identity changes through your actions. Each time you follow through, you reinforce the belief that you are reliable. Not perfect, but consistent. And that belief becomes stronger than any temporary motivation. Motivation often makes you aim too high too quickly. You set unrealistic expectations, push yourself too hard, and then burn out. Consistency forces you to be patient. It teaches you to value progress over perfection. Instead of trying to change everything at once, you focus on doing one thing repeatedly until it becomes part of who you are. That approach might feel slower, but it is far more sustainable. Another truth most people ignore is that consistency builds resilience. When you show up daily, you face resistance regularly. You learn how to act despite boredom, distractions, and setbacks. This builds mental strength in a way that motivation never can. Motivation avoids discomfort, consistency embraces it. Over time, the gap between you and others starts to widen, not because you are more talented, but because you are more reliable in your effort. While others wait to feel ready, you continue moving. While they stop when things get hard, you maintain your rhythm. That difference, repeated over weeks and months, becomes impossible to ignore. The real power lies in the fact that consistency turns effort into habit. Once something becomes a habit, it requires less mental energy. You no longer depend on willpower or emotion. It becomes automatic, part of your routine, part of your identity. This is when progress accelerates without feeling forced. Relying on motivation keeps you trapped in cycles of starting and stopping. Relying on consistency breaks that cycle. It removes uncertainty and replaces it with structure. It transforms effort into results, not through intensity, but through persistence. Discomfort is the one thing most people spend their lives trying to avoid. It shows up in different forms: effort, uncertainty, rejection, discipline. And the natural reaction is to step back, delay, or escape. Your mind is designed to protect you, to keep you safe and comfortable. So when something feels difficult or unfamiliar, it sends signals telling you to stop. The problem is that everything that leads to growth exists on the other side of that discomfort. When you avoid discomfort, you also avoid progress. You stay in routines that feel easy but lead nowhere. You repeat habits that give short-term relief but create long-term frustration. It feels safe in the moment, but over time, it builds a quiet dissatisfaction that's hard to ignore. You start questioning why nothing is changing, even though deep down you know the answer. You chose comfort every time it asked you to choose growth. Embracing discomfort doesn't mean enjoying pain or forcing yourself into extremes. It means recognizing that discomfort is not a threat, it's a signal. It tells you that you are stepping outside your current limits. Instead of running from it, you begin to face it directly. You allow yourself to feel the resistance without letting it control your actions. At first, this feels unnatural. Your instincts will push you to retreat. You will look for excuses, distractions, anything that brings you back to familiarity. But if you stay present in that moment, If you continue despite the tension, something shifts. The discomfort doesn't disappear, but your relationship with it changes. It becomes something you can handle, not something that controls you. There is a hidden advantage in doing what others avoid. Most people will not willingly choose discomfort. They will delay, justify, and settle for less because it feels easier. This creates a gap. Every time you choose to move forward while others hesitate, you step into that gap. You begin to build a version of yourself that is stronger, more focused, and less dependent on comfort. Discomfort also forces you to confront yourself. Without distractions, without easy escapes, you see your habits clearly. You notice where you hesitate, where you doubt, where you hold back. This awareness can be uncomfortable on its own, but it is necessary. You cannot change what you refuse to face. By staying in those moments, you develop clarity, and with clarity comes control. Another important shift happens when you stop labeling discomfort as negative. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid, you start seeing it as part of the process. Effort feels heavy, but it builds strength. Failure feels painful, but it builds understanding. Repetition feels boring, but it builds mastery. When you accept this, discomfort loses its power to discourage you. It becomes expected, even useful. Over time, your tolerance increases. What once felt difficult becomes manageable. Situations that used to intimidate you start to feel normal. This is how growth works. Not through sudden transformation, but through gradual adaptation. Each time you face discomfort, you expand your capacity to handle more. There is also a mental discipline that develops when you embrace discomfort. You stop reacting impulsively to your feelings. You learn to pause, to observe, and then to act with intention. This creates a sense of control that goes beyond external results. It affects how you think, how you respond, and how you carry yourself in challenging situations. Most people wait for things to feel easier before they act, but things become easier because you act despite the difficulty. That distinction changes everything. Instead of waiting for the right conditions, you create them through your behavior. You build confidence not by avoiding discomfort, but by moving through it repeatedly. As this becomes part of your mindset, your standards begin to rise. What you once accepted as good enough no longer satisfies you. You start expecting more from yourself. Not because you are forced to, but because you know you can handle it. This shift is subtle but powerful. It changes the way you approach challenges, goals, and even everyday decisions. Discomfort never fully disappears, but it stops being an obstacle. It becomes a constant companion on the path of growth. And instead of slowing you down, it starts pushing you forward. Your mind is not always on your side. It reacts fast, protects comfort, avoids effort, and creates stories that feel true in the moment. It can turn small doubts into convincing arguments, turning hesitation into delay and delay into habit. If you don't take control of it, it will quietly take control of you, not in dramatic ways, but through everyday decisions that slowly shape your life. Most thoughts are automatic. They come from patterns you've repeated for years, influenced by your environment, your past experiences, and your habits. You don't consciously choose most of them, yet they influence how you act. A single thought like, "I'll do it later," or "this is too much right now," can seem harmless, but repeated often enough, it becomes a default response. Over time, those small mental habits create a version of you that hesitates more than it acts. Controlling your mind doesn't mean stopping thoughts from appearing. That's not realistic. It means choosing which thoughts you listen to and which ones you ignore. It's about creating a space between what you feel and what you do. In that space, you decide your response instead of reacting automatically. The first step is awareness. You have to notice what's happening in your mind without immediately agreeing with it. When a thought appears, instead of accepting it as truth, you observe it. You question it. You recognize that just because something feels convincing doesn't mean it's useful. This alone changes your relationship with your thoughts. You move from being controlled by them to observing them. There will be resistance. Your mind is used to running on autopilot, and breaking that pattern requires effort. It will try to pull you back into familiar thinking. It will offer comfort, excuses, and justifications. But once you start recognizing these patterns, they lose some of their power. You begin to see them for what they are, temporary mental reactions, not commands. Control also comes from intentional direction. Instead of waiting for your mind to decide your actions, you decide in advance what needs to be done. When a moment of hesitation appears, you already have an answer. This reduces the chance of getting stuck in overthinking. You don't waste energy debating with yourself because the decision is already made. Another important part of controlling your mind is managing focus. Your attention is limited, and where you place it determines your experience. If you constantly focus on distractions, negativity, or comparison, your mind becomes scattered and reactive. But when you train yourself to focus on what matters, your actions, your priorities, your progress, you create stability. You become less affected by external noise and more connected to your own direction. Emotions will still show up. Doubt, frustration, boredom, they are part of the process. Controlling your mind doesn't eliminate them. It changes how you respond to them. Instead of letting them dictate your behavior, you acknowledge them and continue moving forward. This builds a level of discipline that goes beyond physical action. It becomes mental strength. There is also a level of honesty required. You have to be willing to confront the ways your mind holds you back, the excuses you repeat, the fears you avoid, the patterns you ignore. This isn't comfortable, but it is necessary. Without that honesty, you stay trapped in cycles without understanding why. Over time, control becomes more natural. The gap between thought and action grows wider, giving you more space to choose. You become less reactive and more intentional. Situations that once overwhelmed you start to feel manageable because you are no longer carried by every passing thought. This kind of control creates consistency. Your actions are no longer dependent on your mental state. Whether you feel confident or uncertain, motivated or tired, you still follow through. That reliability builds trust in yourself, and that trust becomes a foundation for everything else. Your mind will always produce noise, but it doesn't have to define your direction. The more you practice control, the quieter that noise becomes. Not because it disappears, but because you stop giving it authority. Every day looks small when you're living it. The actions feel insignificant, almost forgettable. Waking up a little earlier, choosing to work instead of scrolling, finishing something you started. None of it feels like it changes your life in the moment. That's why most people underestimate their daily habits. They're quiet, repetitive, and easy to ignore. But over time, they become the most powerful force shaping who you are. Your life is not built on big decisions alone. It's built on what you do repeatedly. The small choices you make every day, what you focus on, how you spend your time, how you respond to discomfort, stack up. They don't stay small, they multiply. One action leads to another, and before you realize it, you've created a pattern. That pattern becomes your routine, and your routine becomes your identity. The dangerous part is that this happens whether you're intentional or not. If you don't choose your habits consciously, they will form automatically based on convenience and comfort. You'll default to what feels easy, what gives instant relief, what requires the least effort. And while that might feel harmless in the moment, it slowly builds a version of you that avoids growth. On the other hand, when you start choosing your habits with intention, everything begins to shift. You don't try to change your entire life at once. You focus on small, consistent actions that align with the person you want to become. You repeat them daily, even when they feel boring or unnecessary. Over time, those actions stop feeling like effort and start feeling like part of who you are. There is a compounding effect that most people don't notice until it's too late. Good habits build on each other. One positive action makes the next one easier. You create momentum, and that momentum carries you forward. The same is true for negative habits. One small compromise leads to another, and eventually, it becomes difficult to break the cycle. That's why consistency matters more than intensity. It's not about doing something perfectly once. It's about doing it repeatedly over time. Another important shift happens when habits become automatic. At the beginning, everything requires effort. You have to remind yourself, push yourself, and stay aware. But with repetition, your brain adapts. It starts recognizing patterns and turning them into routines. What once required discipline now requires less energy. This is where real change becomes sustainable. Your habits also shape the way you see yourself. Every time you follow through on something, you reinforce the idea that you are reliable. Every time you avoid or delay, you reinforce the opposite. This builds your self-image over time. You don't just act differently. You start believing differently about who you are. And that belief influences future actions. There's also a level of honesty involved in recognizing your habits. It's easy to focus on goals and ignore the daily behaviors that either support or sabotage them. But goals are only outcomes. Habits are the process that leads to those outcomes. If your habits don't align with your goals, the results will never match your expectations. Changing habits requires patience. There is no instant transformation. Progress is gradual, often invisible at first. You might not see results for days or even weeks. This is where most people lose focus because they expect immediate feedback. But the real change is happening beneath the surface. Your consistency is building something that will eventually become visible. There will be moments when you slip, when you fall back into old patterns. That doesn't erase your progress. What matters is how quickly you return to your habits. The longer you stay consistent, the easier it becomes to recover from setbacks. You stop seeing them as failures and start seeing them as part of the process. Over time, the gap between your old self and your current self becomes clear. Not because of one big moment, but because of hundreds of small actions repeated daily. The person you become is not defined by what you intend to do, but by what you consistently do. Your habits are always shaping you, whether you notice it or not, and the version of you that exists in the future is already being built by the choices you make today.